Thank you very much, Thomas. And it's lovely to see so many familiar and so many new faces today. Thank you for joining. I'm delighted to introduce you to our speaker, Colin Wilson, and his talk about teams and performance, how to get a team firing together. I've known Colin for a long time. I think it's about 2008, Colin, when we worked together at Telos Partners, the consultancy in Windsor. And that's where I first became involved in the business athlete program, which I'm sure Colin will tell you a bit about as part of his talk. Colin's an accomplished and sought after executive coach, as well as taking on interim roles in the sports, not-for-profit and mental health fields. He's worked at the highest level in business and sport. And in the sport industry, he's worked for Sport UK and the British Olympic Association, as well as being an accomplished sportsman in his own right, winning 2 silver medals for table tennis in the Commonwealth Games. So I don't want to take up too much time, so let me hand you over to Colin. We'll have some time for a bit of discussion and Q&A at the end, and I'll monitor the chat box in case you've got any questions or points you want to raise as we go along. And can I just remind you all to put yourselves on mute so that we can hear Colin clearly. Thank you very much. And Colin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Neville. Nice to see you again. And thanks for the support of Thomas and Sue as well. And all the XTEND network. It was, I think, 3 years ago when I did my last talk in the city. And also to my non-XTEND member friends, and maybe they'll join after this, and thanks to them for maybe some moral support as we go. We're going to talk a little bit about teams, and the topic is so broad. I just thought what to include, what can you not include? So it's a very, very broad subject. So we can only scratch the surface in some ways, but I hope we can give certain things a good deep scratch, and maybe enough of a scratch to enable us to renovate a few things in our own thinking. So now I was challenged to do this because last time I did a table tennis demonstration. So I'll just stand up here, and I've got to demonstrate that I can actually play table tennis. So is that bounce very loud?
Quite, yes.
It is loud. Okay, so this is what's called a sandpaper bat. It's called sandpaper, and we think of that as being rough, but actually it's very low friction on a table tennis ball. You might be able to see the print of the ball is actually pretty stable, so we're not getting any spin with that. But if I change to my modern rubber bat, and I change to a ball that I've painted red on half the ball, you might see the stillness of the spin on the ball there. But then when I start to do that, you can start to see the ball starts to spin around. And that's one of the things that I do these days, is to coach others at table tennis and try and get the youngsters beating some of the Chinese players, if that's one of their aims. So I'm still active in coaching in sport and with youth, as well as doing the kind of the more businessy type stuff. I've been involved with lots of teams, and I've often been responsible for developing them. And then tonight we've got a lot of consultants around who will have done similarly. So I don't want to teach people to suck eggs at all. And one of the things I think of about consultants is sometimes I meet colleagues who are consultants or coaches in their own right, and they're absolutely fantastic at what they do. And I've kind of decided that part of this is not just because they're interested in a topic, but it's actually a survival issue for them. The skills that they have were survival issues for them when they were young. And I think a lot of skilled people learned their skills very, very early. For me, as a young table tennis player, I was really lucky. And my dad got me playing table tennis. He played, not to any high level, but he played, and I had an elder brother, and I had parental support, which was very fortunate. When I was 9, I picked up a bat and had a game. And I liked it. And within a year, I was sort of number 2 in England and running around the circuit every weekend with mum and dad with flasks of sandwiches and staying overnight in dodgy hotels, or getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning because we couldn't afford a hotel. But one of the things of being a young sportsman is that you actually need adults get things done for you. Organisers run tournaments. I remember finishing a Saturday and Sunday tournament. I was about 13 years of age, and it was in Burford in Gloucestershire, and we finished at 1:35 a.m. on Monday morning. So late Sunday night, it was well after midnight. And then we had to drive home in the fog, and then I had to go to school the next morning. And I had my dad go to another tournament, and he'd get lost. And so all of this is kind of going on around me, and I'm trying to have the perfect environment for my own selfish needs as a youngster. And I'm going around going, why are adults so bad at working together and making things happen properly? So I think this is kind of a survival skill for me when I was very young. And that got me to thinking, as I've matured a tiny bit, where does individual or team performance actually come from? How does it all work? And then by the time I was 19, I was kind of hired in to help on coach education courses, because I could talk a little bit, and I obviously was a good technical model from the sport. And so I was into kind of learning and development and adults and groups and all of that from a very young age. So I was number 1 or 2 in England from the age of 10 to about 18. So you're trying to just create the environment where you can maximize your progress. That's what you do as an athlete, to be properly selfish, as Charles Handy would say. And we're trying to make things happen. And all the while you're just thinking, well, I need to help these people do what they do better, because that helps me. So that was part of it. And the other thing was that I realized how many people were serving the system, and hence me. So the number of people that were helping out in different ways, and how did they all fit together? I'd think about that on the way home from a competition or something. Also, I had the great privilege, really, in 1979, long time ago when I was very young, to get behind the Iron Curtain. We played in the Yugoslav Open, and then we played in the European Youth Championships in Poznan in Poland. Later, I went to Gdansk in Poland during the miners' strike, which was fascinating because Gdansk is a miners' town, and all the students were asking us about Margaret Thatcher and Arthur Scargill, which was brilliant. But I saw the system at work behind the Iron Curtain, and the difficulties, the poverty, and yet the wonders of the people. And I just thought about, what is it that a whole national society is doing that makes a society work in the way that it does? And they were good at some things and bad at others. And my friend who went also to Czechoslovakia said, we went to the supermarket, there were 2 loaves of bread on the shelf, and it wasn't unusual, and there was a queue, all of those sorts of things. So I kind of think that from a survival point of view, in terms of my own ambition as a table tennis player, I actually kind of imbued a lot of this stuff around teams and performance and how adults work together. And I've been lucky to have amazing mentors in sport that have been much broader around performance, much broader around philosophy. And I've been interested in it ever since. So I've been lucky. And also I've made my full share of howlers. I've made more than a lifetime's worth of howlers in terms of how to operate in teams. To give you one example, I was coaching a female that was playing for England, and I had to drive the minibus out to Hungary because there's no money and there's no funds for anything extra. And there were 6 of us. And so I said to her, how is it that you work with your normal club coach, given that I'm acting as national coach temporarily? Because I would like to kind of behave in the way that they do. And so it's familiar, and when you come off after the first game, how you'd like to be treated. I said, how does Derek treat you? And she said, he's pretty harsh. He's pretty critical, very factual. And I said, okay, that's fine. And I said, how does that go down? She said, I really like that. I get it. I get the facts. I think about it. I know I've got to put my ideas up, and I get back on the table. So I thought, okay. So sure enough, she's playing. She's losing the first game. She's in a bit of a bad mood. She comes off, and I thought, okay, let's go for it. So I said, you're doing this well, I think. And I said, this is not great. This is here. This is there. And I kind of tried to model what I thought she wanted. And she glared at me and then talked a bit and then walked down the other end, and it didn't go well. And she was obviously not happy with the way I'd spoken to her. And she didn't talk to me for about 25 minutes afterwards, but I just sat with her, and then we talked afterwards. And what I didn't realize was I was asking about the interaction, but I knew nothing about their relationship and the trust that they had. So I was just copying behaviors completely out of context because I didn't have that trust. And so, you know, that was just an early learning for me about how those sorts of interactions work and how they can affect team performance in a significant way. And then after that, after I finished playing table tennis, I got into hot air ballooning. So I'll just share my screen. I just thought I need a different sport, something that's less intense, focused in its own way, but a little bit different, and maybe a little bit more sociable. And so I got into, there we go. So I got into hot air ballooning, which is an unbelievably rich team sport because no pilot gets up there without a great deal of help from a team. And the little white figure in there is myself piloting this balloon. And that's Leeds Castle in Kent, where they held the balloon and Bentley fiesta with vintage Bentleys, which was quite stunning. Just really lucky to be around it all. And it was just great that picture got taken. So I got into that sport as well. We flew the Channel, we flew over mountains in Switzerland. And yeah, you need to have a high performing team around you. Otherwise you get burned, literally. You've got a flame that's a foot wide, 8 feet long. It's the equivalent of 10,000 cookers being turned on all at once. And sometimes they're pointing in a direction that a human could be. So looking after the equipment, keeping safe, managing the weather. Ballooning is the safest of all the aviation sports. But we can tell you lots and lots of adventures that we have around landing and taking off and getting caught in winds and flying into fog and all of that kind of thing, which was just wonderful. So onwards. So what we'll look at tonight, first of all, why team performance matters now, particularly now, post-pandemic or mid-pandemic, as I like to think it is probably beyond lockdown possibly, but we're not out of the woods in terms of it being around. And how we've been around remote working, etc., and mental health. Then we'll look at what we actually mean by team performance and potential in a world that has changed significantly qualitatively. What we can and can't learn from sport, because I think a lot of people swallow a lot of things from sport and it's counterproductive. Fourthly, a model for coaching teams, in fact, 2 models for coaching teams. And then the relationship between individual performance and team performance and how we might reach our maximum potential. So zooming on, the first part, why does it matter? Well, we've got some goods and some bads going on. Some of the bads are, a lot of people, I just heard even in the introduction tonight, people talking about environmental issues, biodiversity, climate change. So we've got some significant problems and they're not going to be solved at the individual level, they're systemic. Also, one of the downsides of traditional economics is that you get inequality, and you can see in the right-hand picture the kind of thing that we get. And these are issues and problems that people aren't going to solve except through exceptional repeated teamwork. The upside, if we look at Marion Tupi's work on world gross product, you see the hockey stick in blue at the bottom. The projection to move from 2000 to 2100 is if we can keep on top of our difficulties, manage them socially, and keep innovating and create solutions to our problems, our gross domestic product multiplied by the number of countries, gross product in the world. If you improve by 2%, you're going to double your wealth every 35 years. So we'll be 6 times better off by the end of the century if we can manage our problems. And you can see that we've been destitutely poor until pretty much shortly before the Industrial Revolution. And then our wealth has taken off incredibly, despite these problems, but also with these problems. What is going to keep that going and what's going to solve those other problems? But teamwork is going to be crucial to all of these. And then a bit of a cautionary note from Gregory Bateson, who I think had his tongue in his cheek when he said this. I've just borrowed this from Paul Lawrence on a workshop I went to, and I thought it was a cracking quote. Purposeful, pragmatic action usually results in disaster because man constantly overestimates his capacity to understand the world around him. And I think now, this was written a long time ago, decades ago, but I think that now is a critical time that we can easily do more harm than good with our interactions because we don't understand the system around us. If we talk about systems, they say the only way you can understand a system is to try and change it. Only then do you actually work out how it works. And we're involved in some quite complex systems these days. So what can sport bring? Well, world-class athletes typically report they achieve over 90% of their potential. And senior non-athletes, if you go to a kind of a senior managers conference, they typically report, and this has been repeated many times, that they kind of put their hand up around about, I think my company's using around 40% of my potential. But athletes achieve around 90%. Now, we can't compare like with like, and I'll share a few reasons why, but is there something that we can take from sport and pull into other performance and working environments so that we can be more effective in our teams and as individuals? So if we look at this little equation, what percentage of your potential is the individual using? That's the 40%. And then what's the percentage that the team performance is using relative to individual performance? And typically people say, well, around 50%. So because I trust myself, but I don't trust some others. I'm able to get on and do things, but I can't do that necessarily so efficiently with others. Yes, we have a collective product, which we couldn't do on our own. So yes, we are creating output, but in terms of our potential, maybe we're only achieving about 20% of what we could theoretically achieve as a team. And then if you subtract the Gregory Bateson effect, that the effect that you might be having outside the team might be damaging, this 20% is pretty low and could be lower and even negative in terms of its net impact on the world. So we've got to be careful about assuming that teamwork is always beneficial, is always effective. And there are plenty of examples of teams failing or just not being worth the resources that were put into them. So cautionary note around teams, and can we do a little bit better? Back to the ballooning. This is the image I try and keep in my mind. If I've got a situation that I'd like to get to with a group of people, if I can get to something that feels like this, that would be great. So any questions, please drop into the chat box. Neville will pick them up and interrupt me if he wishes. Meantime, I'll carry on, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end of each part. But I'll carry on with what do we mean by team performance and potential. I think the word performance has come under attack a little bit now in terms of kind of postmodernist thinking about more things than we realize being unconscious, more things that we realize being qualitative rather than quantitative, more things than we realize being social constructs. So what does performance really mean and what is it serving? And I think those are fair questions. In terms of what is a team, maybe a classic definition, I like the definition to a point, is Katzenbach's and Smith's classic one: a small number of people, complementary skills, common purpose, set of performance goals, and an approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. That was back in 1993. So there's some clear things there. By small, they actually clarified later, probably between 4 and 7 people. No one has a team of 50. It doesn't operate as a team. It fragments into subgroups that can be teams, but 50 people can't be a team. They can't be independent and connected when it's so large. So typically we're talking about groups will fragment into towards the sort of 4 to 7 size in order to become effective interdependent team workers. And then of course you can multiply teams on top of each other, but they tend to have that identity at quite a small level. One question is, it doesn't mention, it says complementary skills, but are those skills necessary and are those skills sufficient? That's not answered in the definition. Common purpose and goals, yes, I think you need both. And today, I think so much is around purpose and purposeful work, meaningful work, and then goals need to fit that. It talks about an approach, but I think they probably mean an agreed approach, not a singular approach. So different people might do things different ways with good diversity, and that's agreed, but not everybody is using the same approach. So I think there's diversity of approaches. And then accountable. Yes, they'll be mutually accountable within, and then self-accountable without. So if they're holding themselves mutually accountable, if they're talking to the external world, stakeholders, customers, suppliers, others, then I think they would be whoever's in the situation and needs to speak, just needs to do it authentically, and then be accountable in the group to what they've done and said with external stakeholders. But the external stakeholder piece, I think, is a major omission in this definition of a team. It's quite internalized, and we're back to this idea now that we're part of systems. So teams typically are a piece of a jigsaw, and they're trying to find out what piece they are and what the jigsaw looks like. And we're struggling for that a lot of the time, and we're searching for that. And that's going to continue, I think, to be quite elusive and quite fluid over time as we're talking about teams. And I don't think that was predicted back in the 90s, just how open and fluid teams can become. Types of team. People talk about co-located, hybrid, virtual, self-managed teams. I don't regard those as categories of team. I regard those of methods that a team might use. The categories of team, typically functional, project, cross-functional, like leadership teams. A relay team, like a production line, you pass it to me, I add value, I pass it to someone else. So that's kind of discrete over time. And then informal teams. Have you ever been part of a team that's been an absolutely fantastic team, but nobody ever told it to be a team, and it doesn't have a team leader, but you know it's a team and it's a great social construct? Again, if it's a movement, I don't think that's a team because it's too large to be able to interconnect at that level of intimacy. But certainly informal teams can be, in the social age, I think informal teams can be often more effective than formal ones. You don't have to be formalized in order to be incredibly effective. And these can be very, very positively subversive as well. Moving on. Mark Mortensen. 95% of people think they're in more than one team. And 25% of people interviewed couldn't agree with the rest of the team how many people were in that team. So you can just see how open and fluid and changeable teams are these days. If a quarter of people can't even agree who's in the team and who's not in the team. So yeah, gone are the days when we could reliably chart a team's life. That's the Tuckman 1965 model, forming, storming, norming, performing, to end of project. So we're constantly forming, constantly reforming, and we're working in an ever more complex environment. So thanks for Paul in Australia, who I spoke to just last week. And he brought that. If we're going to create a team or we're operating in a team, I think it's important that we know what the purpose of the team is and what the kind of problem is that we're trying to solve. So let's assume a team is trying to solve a problem. Well, is that problem a first order linear problem? Just simple sums, 2, add another 2, then you've got 4. Is it a first order non-linear problem where it starts to get, you start to get into multiples, but you've still got a kind of input process output model? Is there a second order issue to it where A impacts B, but then with a time lag, B then feeds back on A? So you've got a second order issue of feedback loops, and coronavirus for me was just an absolutely classic example, a tragic, but a classic example of feedback loops with a combination of exponentials and time lags. And as soon as you get a simple system of exponentials with time lags, then the responses to those systems tend to create ever increasing amplitudes of effect in the system. And we've seen that at times with the coronavirus. And then we're in situations that are very complex, very social. And then eventually you get to the kind of the meta complex team, which really says, even for me to assume as a CEO that I have any idea what's going on in the organization is a myth and a fantasy and an invention. All I know is what I am told in my interactions with a few people and with a few checks. And those will be biased and subjective and very often honestly given. But that gives me such a small picture of the overall. So actually, I'm just living in a self-created social construct, but making decisions that affect thousands of lives. And when we think about that, it's quite absurd to think about the kind of the captain of the ship and the control model. And I just about get away with the hot air balloon pilot, but only just before we start to get into more complex systems where what we do can be Gregory Bateson-like dangerous in terms of us thinking that we understand the system that we're in, when actually it's unknowable. And that's the kind of the idea of the meta system. Oh, sorry, gone the wrong way. So in the business athlete, which is our model, we look at 4 aspects. We're talking about getting your team firing. We're not talking about getting them fired, but more like firing on all cylinders. So if you think of cylinders or batteries of energy, physically, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, we've got these batteries. And that would be true of an individual. It would be true of a team. It would be true of an organization. How well charged are you, and is your team, and is your organization, and is your system physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Because they're going to lead to, through good choices and good goal setting towards a worthy purpose, and then we can start to move towards using our potential based at the bottom on some specific principles that we might borrow from sport. Okay. So, anything come up, Neville, yet? Is everyone?
Yes, Colin. James mentioned rugby teams, and
yes.
How many teams are made up of a rugby team?
Yes. That's a great example, because rugby, I think, I'll just come off screen share for a sec. I'm not going to try to be an expert on every sport, but rugby is a game where you've got more people than you would say could be a team. But as they operate, and as the ball travels around, and as they plan, and as things move from one place to another, yeah, they do operate in smaller clumps. I find football fascinating because it's hard to get 11 people to really understand what each other are doing. And that's part of what makes it fascinating. Rugby can be the same. The game's slightly different, so I think they're a little bit more naturally interconnected in rugby. And some of the things in rugby, you've got a few complex elements. In table tennis, I know what the table is going to play like approximately. It's a wooden table, it's 9x5, it's got a certain amount of friction. In rugby, it might be pouring with rain 1 minute, the ball might be slippery. The opposition makes substitutions. That doesn't happen when I'm playing against a table tennis player. So there are more complexities in rugby than there would be, for example, in table tennis. So I think there's a lot that can be learned from rugby if we do it right. And I'm sure that people will have read Clive Woodward and others. Is that okay for now, Neville?
Yes. Let's press on, Colin.
Yeah, sure. Okie dokie. So in terms of what is cautionary in terms of taking things from sport, sport gets a good press around the physical benefits of sport. You develop skills, you develop social skills, and you develop teamwork. But is that really true? Certainly not in all cases. Physical benefits can lead to injury. Skill development can be overdone and lead to burnout. Social skills can lead to negative social effects. And then teamwork can lead to inter-team rivalry, sometimes in unhealthy ways. So let's be careful about pretending that sport is always a great model. It's not. Also, the way that we might take things from sport, we see on TV, oh, they're so talented. I don't use the word talent. It's banned in my table tennis club that I run. You're not allowed to use the word because I find it's never helpful. It never leads to anything good to use the word talent. If we tell a youngster they're talented, they think that they're going to be great even if they don't work hard. And does someone mean they've got an innate ability or that they're very good? It's a very confusing term. But in the population at large, it's still a term that is used very commonly. They're so talented, but that's so ungrowth mindset. It's a very fixed mindset way to think. So it can lead to a kind of a lack of belief or a lack of responsibility. So it's banned for me. Sustaining peak performance is a term that I hear quite a bit. We're going to sustain peak performance. Well, can someone draw that for me, please? I know what a peak looks like. It's got a top to it and it's got a downside on the other side. That's a normal peak. There is no such thing as peak performance. You try to peak again and again and again as a sports person, and you will burn out and you will end your career. There's no such thing. We need to do repeated peak performances, but in between, we need to have that health and rest. On TV, you see fantastic. I've just watched some of the snooker championships. It was amazing. But really, people don't understand everything that goes into making someone that world class. We see a lot of tolerance to stress, but if we don't isolate between the stress situations, we end up with illness, injury, relationship problems, depression, because the stress is ongoing. And that's a very 20th century way to think about, for example, sales executives. And oh, they're great under stress, keep them under pressure, keep them on their toes. We've got to be very, very careful with that. And then so much of, we want you to peak again and again and again, and we just end up with a rat race of overloaded peaks. And a lot of senior executives get that feeling that they're overloaded by those things. So we've got to do something about those. So sport isn't always a good example. So what I say here, a lot of words here, that we
Colin, are we meant to be seeing some slides?
Yes.
You're not sharing your screen at the moment.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. I forgot to put my screen back on. Okay. So I think what we're trying to do instead is to say it's not talent that wins, it's preparation and attention and choices that wins. We don't sustain peak performance. We plan a balance of stimulation and regeneration. Otherwise we burn out. We focus on development and capacities as much as we do on performance, especially in teams. Our tolerance to stress the stress situations need to be isolated one from another. Otherwise we can't recover, and we take greater and greater stress into the next situations. And then we need to set up this performance process of learning and development, of planning, preparing, recording, reflecting. These are things that maybe coaches do. But I think we're getting to the stage now that actually it's just going to become standard for everybody. So this is a 21st century approach to management, leadership, and being part of a team. So if on the left we have a picture of a sports model, 5 elements: physical, technical, mental, tactical, underpinned by and surrounded by performance lifestyle. Eating the right food, going to bed at the right time, etc. And by integrating those 4 elements, we can achieve that 90% of potential if we base our repeated developmental activities on these 8 principles. These are the 8 that I think I can pull from sport that are most applicable to business people. So if we use all of these, supercompensation is where you go out for a run and rest, and then if you rest appropriately and don't rest for too long, then you get that little bump of performance. So if you go again a second time, you're actually starting from a higher level, and you create a trend line of improving performance. But I think for the non-sport environment, I don't think it's physical, mental, technical, tactical. I think it's physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And there we have it. And that's why we use the images that we do in the Business Athlete logo. So physical, mental, emotional, spiritual is where I think we need to be all thinking and all sharing information around our work teams. And as teams, we're not just doing tasks, we're doing the support tasks that enable tasks, which is all that communication, checking people are okay, building trust together. That all needs to be done. And we need to be doing the learning activities as well, because we know the world's going to change. We know things are going to be fluid, and therefore we've got to work on a sensible horizon and be constantly developing ourselves in anticipation of the changes that we can see. So we need to do work tasks and work support tasks and learning tasks. And if you're involved in coaching teams, you might be very familiar with these two models, the Perel model and the systemic team coaching model, which is on the right. The systemic team coaching model of Hawkins, clarifying what are we about, commissioning, linking with your external stakeholders, co-creating what I've just described about how we work together, and then connecting suppliers, customers, stakeholders, investors, so our communication is strong. The commissioning part is more purpose-led, it's about what we're really doing. The Perel model, Clutterbuck on the left, and I'm part of a program at the moment on this. Those are the 6 elements that that the research says we need to focus on in order to move teamwork to towards high performance. In here, I like Frank Dick's quote about learning. Our ability to learn faster than the competition is perhaps the only sustainable competitive advantage we have. Everybody else has the same access to 24 hours in a day, to information, to resources. But if we can learn faster than the competition, then that's great. We also might take a collaborative approach to that and say that our learning is for broader benefit and we're looking for win-win solutions, not just to beat competition. That might be a 20th century paradigm that's looked back on as rather out of date in some ways, even though we are competing as companies one with another. And then what Katzenbach and Smith said, that what sets apart high performance teams is the degree of commitment, particularly how deeply committed the members are to one another. So the deep commitment is what is gained and can be gained more quickly than used to be the case, I think. I think people are learning now how to build deep commitment with each other in a short period of time, remotely, virtually, face-to-face, in order that they can do that. And obviously being part of a network, XTEND, LinkedIn, you can start to trust people sooner because of it. And then the first L of Perel, leadership. And my friend Jeremy Cross has quoted this from elsewhere, but he said, good leadership is not about you being a good leader. Good leadership is making sure that good leadership gets done. So increasingly now we're talking about looking at the team and saying, where does the appropriate leadership lie at any moment so that anyone can take a leadership role? So we're all leaders all the time, and the person who's best placed is the leader in that moment. And I'm saying at the bottom, that's your job as coaches, as consultants, as non-executive directors. Okay. Last couple of items. Achieving a high-performing team. Do stop me if you want to, Nev. So some more factors that we need to pull in. Diversity. Do we need diversity? Absolutely we do. Groupthink. We say, middle-aged, middle-thinking white males, come under some criticism, and for some, to some extent, rightly so. Do we need diversity? Yes. What kind of diversity do we need? Cognitive diversity, so you have rebel ideas, as Matthew Syed's book says. You want viewpoint diversity. You actually want to create optimal conflict around this, not no conflict. We want to create optimal conflict that is the most functional for learning. We're not going to make decisions based on consensus, but we're going to keep working and talking together to get to the right answer. And that's a different concept. Now that's quite difficult to do if you have strong personalities and they're both sure they're right, but that's what we need to work on. So good conflict should be a hallmark of teamwork going forwards. Do we need group identity diversity? Some argue yes, some argue that it's the viewpoint and cognitive that we need to create that. And in order to get that, we need much greater inclusion one way or another. The research about learning from failure, fail fast, fail cheap. The research from Kim and Lee is that typically organizations don't learn from failure, and that they misattribute the reasons for failure to external factors when actually many more of them were internal. So we're still not learning around blame cultures, around not understanding our own role in our own demise. And they said the organizations that do are the organizations that have a culture of failing and of celebrating failure and of recovering from failure and of not punishing failure. And it's only as you build a culture of that over a period of time that when the larger failures come, you've got that history to work from. Theoretical is not sufficient. When the big failures hit and you need to deal with those, it's too late then to say we're going to be really good at dealing with failure. It needs to be inbred into the DNA of the organization in order for that good learning from failure to happen. And if we look at gymnastics, I've mentored a few gymnastics high performance coaches, and it is brutal. You see them on TV and they're fantastic. The training, they're normally working on a 30-70 ratio of likelihood of success. So if they're getting it right half the time, the coach will make it more difficult. They're expected to work and stay enthusiastic on a success rate of about 30%. And in gymnastics, if you're falling off the rings, if you're crashing into the pommel horse, if you're coming off the bar, the beam, these hurt. It physically hurts. You're in tears, you've got bruises, and you go again and again and again. And they deal pretty much with people that are resilient to a 70% failure rate every 2 or 3 minutes. So it gives you an idea of how mentally strong the gymnasts are. So how hard to push a team, I think, depends upon our judgment about how resilient they are. If we're talking about I can never pronounce the name, Helmy's flow, not too much, not too little. We don't want to burn out. We don't want to bore out our people. So we need to find eustress rather than distress in the environment. And then I'm going to quote Neil, who's on the call tonight, Neil Scotton from Neil's Wheel. Just look up Neil's Wheel on the internet, and it will take you into a whole new world of systems and winning without losing. Winning without losing is the business athlete's strapline. And Neil talks about the win-win being the win of people, the win of prosperity, and the win of planet all at the same time. And more of teamwork will be about how we achieve the 3 Ps at the same time. So it's no longer good enough to get a win-win between myself and you. We need a win-win-win, where there are more external stakeholders, and the ultimate stakeholder, our planet, that nourishes us, is part of that conversation. And then finally,
Colin,
yes, Neville.
Can I interrupt you, Colin? Because Ed raised a good point. Is teamwork all about winning, being able to win?
No, because it depends how you define winning. If you define winning in a narrow sense, you can say that Gregory Bateson's right, and your teamwork, although it looks effective to you, might be actually negative overall, might have a negative impact on the population as a whole. If we're talking about a win in terms of people, prosperity, and planet all at the same time, then teamwork aimed towards that is probably pretty valid. So winning is a very interesting concept, shouldn't be taken directly from sport because it's too competitive and too win-lose. But if you apply it more broadly, then I think winning can be, I use winning as a metaphor, but I mean it very broadly when I do so. It's a win-win-win.
Thank you. And before we carry on with your slides, could you give us a couple more examples of small failures, perhaps not from sport?
Yes, a product launch. A product launch is likely to fail. More product launches fail than succeed. So what do you do about that? Well, typically the learning is get rid of the people who created it because they obviously didn't do a very good job, and get a new team in. And the cost of doing that is huge, rather than try and learn internally from the mistakes and have a great deal of forgiveness. Have the principle of sack them. I've just paid £1 million to teach them. So that kind of attitude. And I think what you'll find is that in agile coaching, so from agile software, we now have agile coaching with scrum masters, etc. And those are examples of fail early, fail often. And instead of having no product until you've built a Rolls Royce, we'll say, well, we'll build a skateboard first, and then we'll build a tricycle, and then we'll build a motorbike, and then we'll build a car, and then we'll build a Rolls Royce. So every stage, you're getting much more regular feedback from customers, suppliers, stakeholders, investors, so that you can navigate your way through to a win through a much more emergent process.
Thank you. Right, let's carry on, Colin.
Okay, so the last bit I've really got for you is to say, one of the things that we need to apply.
No more slides.
Yeah, I'm fine without the slides for the moment. That's good. Thanks, Nev. Is the 3 C's of trust, which is a colleague of mine. The 3 C's of trust. Simon Sinek, I saw him only a couple of weeks ago. Don't always like what Simon Sinek comes up with, but there's normally something good within it. And he said, a team is not a group of people who work together. It's a group of people who trust each other. And I thought that was a really good challenge to us. Not necessarily perfectly accurate, but a good challenge. A team is not a group of people who work together. It's a group of people who trust each other. And the 3 C's of trust from Stephen Covey days of the 90s, that would be character and competence. But now has been added, and probably pretty well accepted now, communication as well. You've got to be trusted. You've got to be trustworthy and able to be trusted around communication. So character on its own is not enough. Competence on its own is not enough. And also communication on its own is not enough. And any 2 of those 3 is not enough. We need all 3 of the 3 C's of trust in order to make teamwork work. So I'm going to flick forwards a couple of slides. And I'm just going to ask you a question about, if you think of a team that you're part of, and Sue, I don't think we'll go into breakouts for this, but I just want to ask you to just grab a paper and pen and say, think of a team that you're part of, or think of yourself if you wish. And how would you mark it on a scale of 1 to 6 in terms of its physical energy? So that might be the energy of the people. It might be the vibes of the artifacts and the buildings that it inhabits. So to what extent is your team or the organization that it serves feeling full of energy, able to tackle any task, well rested and alert, feeling fit, healthy, and looking good, like the marketing materials are really sharp and up to date? That would be a 6. And a 1, feeling constantly physically tired, lacking energy, poor quality of sleep, not eating well, overweight, underweight, unfit, suffering poor health, and looking unhealthy. Is your organization or your team looking and feeling like this? That would be a 1 out of 6. Give yourself a mark between 1 and 6 for physical. Then we're going to move on to mental. Feeling mentally sharp would be a 6, able to focus and concentrate effectively, strong motivation and drive towards worthwhile goals, enjoy and rise to intellectual challenges. Or a 1, unable to concentrate, unable to come to decisions, no real motivation, lacking in direction, no clear goals. Is that where your team is right now? Where are you on that? Emotionally, a 6, high self-esteem and confidence, positive and upbeat, able to cope positively, deep, meaningful and genuine relationships, fully aware of your range of emotions, so you're not unconsciously leaking and dumping your emotional negatives on others. And a 1, low self-esteem and confidence, feeling emotionally low, unaware of the impact of your emotions on your behaviors. And then, as I was just describing, unaware of the impact of your behaviors on others. Are you a 1 or a 6? And then finally, spiritually, or if we did want to get away from religion here, you can say transpersonally. So we're talking here about purpose, values, legacy, vision, ambition, that kind of thing. Things that are bigger than us, as a team. Strong sense of purpose, clear guiding vision, core set of values, strong belief in your legacy. Is that where your team is? Or is it a 1? You have no idea of why you do, or why you do what you do, or what success will look like for you. You have little faith or belief that what you do makes a difference, and you're not aware of what values are important to you or how your day-to-day behaviors are not reflecting our core values. So if you were to take an average across there, what our business athlete model indicates is that if your average is around about 4, I'll come off screen share for a second. If your average is about 4, you're probably meeting around 45% of the potential you could be now. 5, and you're probably reaching around 65 to 70%. So if you're very good in those areas, but there are gaps that you need to fill in, maybe about 70% of your potential. If you're getting around the 3s, you're probably meeting around 25% of your potential. And there are a lot of teams out there that are down at the 20% end, where the people themselves aren't bringing everything, or the organization isn't able to bring everything. And when they interact as a team, it's less than 100%, not more than 100%. We're not getting the synergy, and we really need to get to that situation now, because I think it's going to be a crucial 20, 30 years where we really want to get the kind of these numbers up. So I'll just go back to one final slide to show you. So if we go back to this one and update it. So we said before that a team on average might be meeting 20% of its potential by default. If we can get the individual's potential, use of potential, up to 60%, and we can at least get up to 100%, so that between the entropy and the synergy, we're getting a decent balance of synergy within there, then we're going to triple our effectiveness as a team. So we're getting a 3-fold increase. And that would be what Peter Drucker, the great management guru of the 20th century, said when he said, the great industrial miracle of the 20th century has been the 50-fold increase in the productivity of the manual worker. He said, the challenge of the 21st century will be to create a 50-fold increase in the productivity of the knowledge worker. And what he could have said is, whilst at the same time decreasing our environmental impact and decreasing the social impacts of inequality. So that's where I'm hoping we're getting to. That's why I wanted to talk about teams today. And I hope it's been at least interesting to think about some of the ways in which we can maybe get our teams to be feeling a little bit floating, but a little bit floaty like this. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm happy to stay for questions and answers.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Colin. That was a wonderful tour through different aspects of teamwork and research about it. And I've certainly taken away the importance of making sure I have some small failures every day. And that where I'm in a team, it's important that we trust each other. And it's good to be reminded of your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual model. So maybe there'll be some more questions about that. Has anybody else on the call got some questions or comments about what we've learnt about this evening?
Colin.
Hello.
James Leaper.
Hello, James.
Thank you so much. My brain is sort of buzzing away at the moment. What's popped into my head is the enigma of test match cricket.
Ah.
And I've literally just made this up. So, you know, don't think someone has said this, but it seems to me from what you've described that the reason I enjoy test match cricket so much is because I find 11 solo teams setting out to play together as one individual.
Very good. Very good. And that's what it looks like when it's done well.
Yeah.
And that's even at test match level. I mean, it's quite rare, isn't it, to get that high performing team working. I think a lot of us have experienced being in a high performance team, but it's probably been rare and it's probably been memorable but it's not been that frequent that we actually get to that level. And even for test match cricket teams, it's part of the beauty of the sport. For example, cricket, is that we wait for it and then we see it and it's absolutely beautiful.
And sometimes there isn't even a result.
The process is more important than the outcome.
Yep.
Colin, whatever happened to Desmond Douglas? He was like my schoolboy table tennis hero on TV.
Your schoolboy table tennis hero. Well, I can tell you, I spoke to Des a couple of weeks ago, and he's still doing this every day. He's 63 years of age, and he is probably the same standard, because he doesn't compete now, but he coaches. He's probably the same standard as the England number 9 man.
Wow.
At 63 years of age, in a sport where you're often playing more than 2 shots a second. Des is my hero. I played with him and we won the National League together for Bath. I was number 3 in our team. I was supposed to be quite good. I was top 10 England men's, and I was number 3 in our team. But the team was Desmond Douglas first, then Matthew Syed. Some of you may know him from the Times and from various books. And I was number 3, and Kevin Satchell was 4, and we won, probably unsurprisingly, we won the national title. But being with Des has been a revelation. I met Des on training camps when I was 13. I got selected for England junior training camps, and he was an absolute gentleman and an absolute silent assassin on the table.
Okay.
So lovely guy. He's never been impolite to anybody, including me, and I deserved it on many occasions. On staying overnight training camps, in the bar, up to no good. And Des was always gracious and always carried himself beautifully. He's like a monarch. He's like the Queen in the way that he carries himself in his business. But you get him on the table, and trying to win a point is just like trying to pull a sword out of a stone. It's just unbelievable.
And so someone like that who's sustained that level of performance for so long,
Yes.
on what's perceived as almost an individual sport, has he created a team around him, or has it been individual merit in your view of his career?
There has been a system around him, but I will be the first to say that he has made the most of it, but he's not particularly a product of it. He's very individual. He's got his own ideas. When he coaches, he sometimes says things that are incorrect. I'd say that if he was on this call. But he's got such an unconscious competence, and he doesn't get involved with too much reflecting back and becoming, a really reflective coach and becoming consciously competent and then going again. He knows so much. But if you just listen to him and take him, not literally, but spiritually, if you like, it's like reading scripture. You don't necessarily have to take every word literally, but you learn so much. And he's brought on dozens of young players and I've just sat metaphorically in his lap and listened to him, and been out for a meal after matches, and I've just listened and listened and listened, and I've learned so much from the man. He's my hero. He's a professional model, and an absolute killer on the court.
Thanks for sharing.
I'm glad you know, Ed.
What a tribute.
I'd make it higher if I could, really.
Colin, can I just ask a more general question, which I had mentioned when we spoke initially? How do you keep your team firing when the goalpost keeps moving? So 2 examples. With the Olympics in Tokyo, the athletes thought they were going to be there last year. They still think they're going to be there in 3 weeks' time, but there might be question marks. Yeah. And similarly, all these headmasters and headmistresses who kept on getting their school ready to keep the kids in, and then the data suddenly told them, sorry, it ain't going to happen, wait another whatever. I mean, how do you keep these people on side to do the best next time round?
Okay, Okay, great question. And we've seen people suffering, and we've seen some people managing surprisingly well. So I've kind of drawn this a kind of exaggerated view of, 20th century thinking and 21st century thinking, which is kind of post-pandemic thinking, if you like, or post-lockdown thinking. So I've drawn that just kind of for effect. But I think the 20th century thinking bangs its head on a wall with these problems if it's thinking about linear systems, first order, second order linear systems, because they're just not applying. If you're narrow in your focus, if you're very good at focusing on a table tennis ball, that might be great for a table tennis career, but it's not going to help you in that situation. If you've got grand visions and grand goals that support those visions, they're getting broken all the time, and it's just heartbreaking. So I think what we're doing in this process is moving from grand visions to emergence, from grand goals to small time frame goals. We're moving from goals more to purpose, and we've seen so many people now talking about purpose. And even when that is stripped back and we're challenged by new concepts around, critical social justice and things like that, it makes us really think about these things in new ways. Even purpose gets challenged, and then we move to principles, and then we move back to values. And in the end, I think you're operating locally. You're hoping to have a broad effect like a pebble in a pond, but you can only act and think locally because you don't see and know the system too much beyond, and you strip it back to principles and values. I think in the end, you then add purpose when you can, and then on the back of that you can invent some small goals towards that purpose. But I think you expect to get knocked out of your boat and back into the water all the time, just like a gymnast, with a failure rate of maybe 70% every few minutes. But if you stick to your values and you stick to your principles, and evolve your principles as you're seeing the horizon, then I think you've got a chance of emerging from these things very well and being able to look back in hindsight at some unbelievable achievements that you couldn't have planned, but you can be proud that you've seen accomplished partly through your own actions on the journey. So
Colin, are you trying to say when a coach or leader finds themselves in a situation like this, trying to use a philosophy that turns the situation into a small failure that you can learn from and prepare yourself for the next is the best approach?
What is the best approach, sir?
Trying to turn the situation you're in into a small failure that you can learn from and move on. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying? Should be partly, and I don't want to be the guru. I haven't got the answers to all the questions, but you're asking me, so I'll just give you my opinion and my current thoughts on it. I might have changed them by next week because I try and evolve as quickly as I can. But yes, I think small goals good. And I actually come to military examples. A friend of mine was in the American intelligence. And when he went into interrogation simulation, where they simulate being behind enemy lines, getting caught, getting interrogated, and one of the things that he did, because they could plan for it, he had a handkerchief, and he had the handkerchief, and he thought this out himself. And the night before he went into the situation, and had to leave his family behind for a week or so, he got the handkerchief out, and all his wife and his two daughters. And they all held it, and they talked about him and their love for each other, and they kissed the handkerchief, and he kept the handkerchief. And one of the things was, when he was, stripped and then given other clothes, he was allowed to keep the handkerchief. Nobody thought it was significant. And he kept that. And during that period, he would look at it and feel it and know it and see it and know it was in his pocket. And he kept that as an example of small victories and of things that I know that the enemy doesn't know. And that helped incredibly with morale. And I think we've got to be careful with goals, as I've already said, but even more so because sometimes we're stripped even of the ability to achieve goals. The prisoner of war in Vietnam who had about, I think, 9 feet long.
and they were kept in solitary confinement, and they were there for like 4 years. So I'm kind of paraphrasing, but they played golf every day. So every 9 feet they'd turn around, and that would make it 18 feet and 27 feet. And they visualized the whole thing, and they played 2 rounds of golf every day for 4 years in a cell. And when they came out, the first round of golf they did, they were only about 8 shots off their normal ability, because they're able to visualize, they're able to simulate, and they're able to occupy a world that was tenable and acceptable. So but they didn't have a goal. It was just principles. It was just values. And in the end, I think the last thing that we can hold on to is our values. And even those are up for grabs if we're faced with, you know, a good couple of weeks with a good military interrogation team. You know, we may be broken physically, mentally, emotionally, and even spiritually beyond a point. But I think the universe knows our real spirit behind that. But on the way to there's a lot that we can do if we just live our values.
Colin, may I add something to that? I am at this Geeta, and
Hi, Geeta.
I work both as an agile coach and an executive coach. To this question of how do you motivate your team and keep them highly performant even when the goalpost is moving? Yes. I found that creating a culture of what feels rewarded in the team is crucial here. Right. And if we focus more on the working together bit than the winning or reaching the goal bit, that's when something fundamentally shifts within the dynamic of the team. So this becomes more important, and then everything else stops mattering as much.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Couldn't have put it anywhere near as good as that. I'm coming on your next talk. That was beautiful, Geeta. Thank you. Yeah. So so building that bond, that what Katzenbach and Smith were calling that deep commitment to one another is what sets high performance teams apart. And when things are difficult or impossible or unfair, then that can strengthen our individual sense of purpose and values.
Yeah, and your concentric circles of linear, non-linear, second order, it reminded me a lot of the Kinevin framework. And often it's in that chaos space. We think like, chaos is bad, even with COVID and things. But then there are a lot of teams and organizations that found innovation in the chaos space, because in chaos, you have the attention of everybody. And that is something a leader can never miss or lose. So I think complexity or chaos, I think they're both good in certain ways.
And even the white middle-aged CEOs, and I heard from one yesterday, they literally used the words, never waste a good crisis. Exactly. So even from that perspective, it's very much the case. Thank you, Geeta.
Colin, off the back of that, and how do you feel that technology has impacted the crisis? How do you feel that technology has brought teams together? I'd love to know your view on that.
I feel that God waited until video conferencing was invented before putting this pandemic in front of us all.
Absolutely.
So I'm grateful. I'm really grateful that we can communicate like this. And imagine what it would have been like if this had happened and it was the 1960s technology.
Yeah. I've just, so when this pandemic actually hit, I was an account manager for lots of businesses. So, and they were the wealth management businesses. So my job was to get all these people that were used to face, getting them into having video conferencing and working that way, and then changing. And it was a great shift to see all these people. And I used to test them, and you see them going redder and redder, just to show them how to share the screen on Zoom. And it was great to kind of go through that transition. So I think at the moment I work with Microsoft and Teams, so it's how that's evolved. So I'd like to see how your kind of viewpoint of video conferencing.
I know that there's, for me as an economist, economics and stats university background a million years ago, and while I'm aware of the environmental and the inequality of social domination, if Bill Gates decides to come into the industry which I'm in, he can dominate it. He's got the economic power to there, and I would be out of business. That would be a cruel piece of capitalism. And I get that. But when I look at the hockey stick, and we've been in abject poverty until 1850, and the rate at which we've got better off, we have massive problems. I'm part of a climate group on the, with coaching supervisors. But at the same time, you know, I do respect and heed our ability to innovate. You know, we've managed to make 8% of the Sahara Desert green, partly CO2, partly human. Commodity prices are 70% lower relative to wages than they were in 1980. And this is where we're supposed to be gobbling up the planet. So I do have some faith in innovation. I do have faith in technology. I'm by no means Pollyannic about it, because it can bring all sorts of difficulties as well. And some of those can be existential. But if we can keep innovating, if we can keep improving technology, if we can keep on top of computers becoming cleverer than we are and harming us, then we should be better off. I mean, the number of people who are in absolute poverty earning $2 a day or less, okay, very slowly, but it's actually going down by 100 and odd thousand people a day. So people are getting better off, and the poorest are getting better off on average. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. But I'm going to take a kind of I'm kind of going for liberal rather than critical kind of theory here. So I'm going to remain optimistic about technology and what it does for us. And in terms of us running teams, I think equally so. I think the hardest thing is going to be the hybrid team. And people are talking about remote teams, or, you know, we're going to be co-located, or we're going to be remote.
Well, we shut our office, so we don't need our office. We're a technology company, and we work from home.
There you go. Who needs an office? But where people keep an office and want to keep an office, if there's 10 in your team, let's say there's 10, often there's more than 4 to 7 in a team. Let's say there's 10, and 5 of you are at an office around a water cooler and 5 are at home, disparate. What's going to happen? What's going to happen in those relationships? What's going to happen in terms of productivity? I think the hybrid team is something we've really got to get our teeth into. So when some of you are there physically and some of you are on screen, I think the cultural effects of that might be significant.
I agree. I don't think it works, to be fair.
Yes, we're probably going to be challenged at XTEND very shortly as to whether we can have hybrid networking, ?
Yes, it is a huge question mark. I see in the chat box I'm getting challenged on poverty as well. That's fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I think to do with productivity. I mean, the UK in the 19th century, because of the machines, the productivity per inhabitant increased tremendously, which is how the UK became so rich. Now you look at China, where there's 1 billion plus of them. Every time their productivity individually increases, we're on the losing battle because we haven't got 1 billion people here. So, you know, which is why, you know, the center of gravity is moving eastward.
Oh, of course. And I hear the win-lose mentality of what you've said as well. You know, we could just say, well, that's another 500 million people out of poverty. Great. Let's learn how to deal with this. Personally, I'm up for a little bit of liberal democracy rather than one-party states. But I think the facts are that China has been very free economically, and there's going to be some massive adventures and difficulties as China dominates.
Going back to your idea about the 20th century manager and 21st century manager, I mean, looking at the way when I went to school, we were given projects to do individually, and we each presented our project individually. Now, our son, who's in his early 20s, has always had projects given to him, you know, as a group of 2 or 3 or 4. And even in his finals at university, you know, they're being tested to present things as a group. And the project numbers keep changing in the team. And, you know, for final exams, I find that's quite remarkable that it's really moved all that way.
Yes. The end of the hero.
I hated it. It was the same when I was at university. They'd say there's 4 of you. you know, you're putting this presentation together and two of them would be drunk in the bar, and it was crazy.
That's the entropy rather than the synergy. Yes.
I suppose the small savior this year is that the pubs were all closed.
Well, the bad thing is I was the one that was drunk in the bar, so it's.
Anyway,
I remember doing all your work, Kyle.
I'm sorry.
I remember having to do all your work.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Neville. It was much appreciated.
Anyway, before any more of us disappear, may I thank Neville for convincing Colin to come back and talk to us a second time.
Okay.
And may I thank you, Colin, for this presentation, which had quite a lot of theory. So I looked forward, if you can share the slides with us,
I will.
to be able to go through them again. And what I'll keep in mind is that accepting 70% small failures on a regular basis and keep it going.
Yeah, if you're lucky, Thomas. Yes.
Thank you.
So if anyone wants
Anyway,
to contact me, they can do so there. But it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much.